Let's bring in Michael Wesley now. Professor Wesley is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor International at the University of Melbourne. Professor Wesley, in the end, the capitulation was so swift, wasn't it, of the Afghan National Army, and this 20-year project collapses?
Absolutely. And the most recent historical parallel that I can think of, Kieran, is the complete collapse of Iraqi forces under the onslaught of Islamic State back in 2014, when we saw a force that had been trained and equipped by the United States and its allies for over a decade under this sustained assault by an force, and it collapsed very quickly. We're seeing depressingly similar scenes in Afghanistan, and one really wonders, what we really did achieve for all of those 2 decades that we're in Afghanistan, expending all of those lives and all of that blood and treasure to see such a rapid capitulation this time round.
And as you heard from my previous guest, the concern for women is obviously paramount, given those hard-fought gains will almost inevitably be lost, at least in the capital cities. I know in some of the regional areas there was no great change, but in Kabul, certainly there was a shift over the last couple of decades, and you can understand the fear now.
Well, the Taliban has form, hasn't it, in relation to women and girls. It has form in relation to curtailing freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of association. It really is a very grim interpretation of Islam and a very doctrinaire interpretation. And I think women and girls have every right to be frightened, as do some of the ethnic minorities, such as the Hazaras, who have been treated extremely brutally at the hands of the Taliban in the past. Of course, we've seen Taliban state spokesmen saying that this time it will be different. This time women and girls will be allowed access to education. But I must say that I'm not putting a huge amount of store in those statements myself. The Taliban is a fairly diffuse organisation. It's not a hierarchical organisation. And I think the attitudes towards women, girls and minorities are fairly hardline across the rank and file of the Taliban.
Now, the federal government's had its first airlift out of Kabul since the Taliban reclaimed control. It has said that there's more than 430, the figure, of those Afghan nationals who've worked with Australia have visas that have been repatriated already since the embassy was shut. Do you welcome this effort by the government to provide safe haven to those who might be at threat under the Taliban?
Oh, very much so. I think we do have a national obligation to help those who helped us. These were people who believed in what we were trying to achieve for their country, and they were risking a lot by throwing their talents behind what we were doing and in helping us. I certainly know that the personal connections that were made between Australians and Afghans working together side by side to try and build a new Afghanistan were very deep and continue and are enduring. I think it's incumbent on the Australian government to do what it can. It's great to see this flight out. I hope we can see more of them. And I would also urge the government, Kieran, to continue its generous attitude towards those Afghans that have helped Australia and helped Australian troops and other officials in Afghanistan who happen to find themselves in refugee camps over the months and years ahead. That we continue our obligations towards those people as well. And I would hope that we would look very positively on their applications to come to Australia.
Yep, indeed. And with that 3,000, hopefully, as you say, that will provide safe passage to many of those people as well, if not more on top of that. We know Tony Abbott had a 12,000 amnesty for Syrian refugees. Let's see where the federal government goes from here. Just finally, Professor Wesley, when it comes to the Afghanistan nation itself, to the reason we went there in the first place, how worried are you that this once again becomes a hotbed of terrorism, that we end up seeing the likes of Al-Qaeda there once again?
Look, I think it's a really serious possibility, Kieran. The question is, how firm will Taliban rule be? How complete will it be? To what extent will it be a unified regime with a very clear set of authority figures who are able to make sure that that what they do, what they want, is what is done throughout the country. Afghanistan is a very rugged country, as we know, with a lot of borders to it. There's also, to what extent will the Taliban be disciplined, if you like, by threats of retaliation by countries such as the United States, China also, Russia, have very, very clear agendas that they do not want to see terrorism being bred inside Afghanistan. So there are a lot of unknowns there, and I think it will be a country that we watch anxiously for a long time to come, in the hope that it will evolve in a much more safe, stable and rational direction that it seems to have been developing in the last couple of weeks.
Professor Michael Wesley, I appreciate your insights as always. Thank you.
Thanks, Kieran.